Who is representing you in government? I'm Mr. Beat, and I represent this little corner of the internet. Thanks for being here. Wait, what the heck? Why are there only 435 members in the House of Representatives? Yeah, what the heck? Yeah, what the heck? What the heck? What the heck? I mean, what the heck? Ridiculous. I think the vast majority of Americans have no idea.
So as I was going around the Hill, I'd go in and talk to people, picking up business cards basically of the right staffer to talk to, like what committee they might sit on. I would say 90+% of the staffers I talked to could not answer the question, why do we have 435 members in the House of Representatives? And they work there.
Well, it all began at the Constitutional Convention that took place in the summer of 1787. Much of the debate there revolved around what exactly should be the number of seats in the House of Representatives.
If you look at the founding debates around the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, over half of the debate time was about this question of representation.
James Madison, who basically ended up writing the vast majority of the Constitution, argued that the size of the House should be big enough so that representatives aren't out of touch with their constituents, or people they are supposed to represent. But what should that number be? Well, George Washington chimed in and said there should be one representative for every 30,000 people. And when George Washington spoke, people tended to listen, especially since this was pretty much the only time he actually voiced his opinion during the entire convention.
It's the only time he speaks because he thought it was improper for him because of his level of power, basically. But this, he was like, I think we should have better representation, fewer voters per representative.
And that's exactly what happened. Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution spelled out, quote, "The number of representatives shall not exceed one for every 30,000. Well, wait, hold up. That's a maximum number, not a minimum. Yeah, Madison later wrote in Federalist 55 that they done messed up with that one, and many other founding father dudes called for an amendment to fix the problem to establish a minimum number of representatives. The original Bill of Rights contained not 10, but 12 amendments. One of those wouldn't be approved to be added to the Constitution until 1992, 202 years after it was first proposed. That ended up being the 27th Amendment, the one which says any law that raises or lowers the salary of members of Congress can only go into effect after the next congressional election. But many forget about the very First Amendment proposed. Originally, folks called it Article the First, but today it's commonly known as the Congressional Apportionment Amendment. I like Article the First better. Bring it back. It's kind of a mess. Again, here's what it looks like. But simply put, it lays out a mathematical formula for figuring out how many seats there should be in the House of Representatives. Originally, it called for one representative for every 30,000 constituents, with that number eventually going up to one representative for every 50,000 constituents. To put this in perspective, today the population of the United States is around 342 million people. That means if the Congressional Apportionment Amendment, or Article the First, actually passed, today there would be 6,840 members in the House of Representatives. Holy freaking crap. But because the final version of the amendment had mathematical inconsistencies, the amendment was scrapped and has gone into obscurity ever since. Until now. That's right. We're starting a movement. More on that in a bit. When Congress first met in 1789, there were 59 representatives in the House of Representatives, and on average, each of those represented around 34,000 Americans. In the early years of the Republic, the House of Representatives consistently grew to meet the needs of a quickly growing population, as determined by the census, which the federal government did every 10 years. Many chaps also forget that in those early years, American voters often got got to choose multiple candidates to represent them in the House in either at-large elections or in multi-member districts. Jump ahead to after the 1830 census, and Congress increased the size of the House of Representatives to 240 seats, or one representative for every 47,700 constituents. But after the 1840 census, things got a bit dicey. The Apportionment Act of 1842 decreased the number of House seats from 242 to 223. It also basically said there had to be congressional districts, each with only one representative, so no more multiple candidate elections. Now, districts had to be drawn up, and eventually the state legislators who drew up these districts got pretty creative with how they drew them up, leading to a phenomenon now known as gerrymandering. Gerrymandering means manipulating how the boundaries of districts are drawn to either favor one political party or hurt another political party. Even though most Americans now oppose the practice, it's now arguably worse than ever. It was named after a dude named Elbridge Gerry. I know his name is pronounced differently, who as governor signed the bill that approved a weirdly shaped district that benefited his political party in the state of Massachusetts. The district shape somewhat resembled a salamander. So get it? Gary, which turned into Jerry for some reason, plus salamander equals gerrymander? Ha! It's so funny and clever. The early 1800s were a crazy time. Anyway, after the 1850 census, Congress began increasing the size of the House of Representatives, yet again, now using a mathematical formula known as the Hamilton-Vinton method. After the 1860 census, its membership rose to 241. Still though, that left a ratio of one representative for every 130,470 constituents. After the 1870 census, its membership rose to 283, or one representative for every 136,249 constituents. After the 1880 census, its membership rose to 325, or one representative for every 154,428 constituents. After the 1890 census, its membership rose to 356, or one representative for every 176,909 constituents.
After the 1900 census, its membership rose to 386, or one representative for every 197,441 constituents. After the 1910 census, its membership rose to 433, or one representative for every 212,999 constituents.
Can you feel the representation being lost? Oh, it gets worse. By the time of the 1920 census, the United States had become much more urban and scared of the dramatic rise of immigration, leading to both farmers and those terrified of immigrants becoming more skeptical about who should be represented in Congress. This led to a fierce debate in Congress that wouldn't be resolved until 1929. The Reapportionment Act of 1929 capped the number of representatives at 435. And there's been 435 members in the House ever since. You heard that right. The number of voting members of the House of Representatives has been stuck at 435 for more than 100 years, even though the country's population has more than tripled during the same time.
Arbitrary number. No reason for it, not in the Constitution.
Due to this, even though the United States was the OG of a representative democracy, it is one of the least representative democracies around today. Today, each United States representative represents on average around 786,000 Americans. To put that in perspective, each lawmaker in Mexico represents around 248,000 Mexicans. Each lawmaker in Australia represents around 165,000 Australians. Each lawmaker in Ireland represents around 25,000 Irish, and each lawmaker in Iceland represents just around 5,500 Icelanders. Due to this cap of the United States House of Representatives that has now been in place for nearly 100 years, no cap, there is now a burgeoning no cap movement. Sorry.
things don't change, and then all of a sudden they change quickly.
That's Walter D. Clapp, who works with the organization Uncap the House, which has the goal of expanding the size of the House of Representatives by 2029, the 100-year anniversary of the cap. Last year, Clapp moved to Wyoming to run for president.
And my principal campaign message was about that 435 number and getting rid of it. Placing an algorithm, right? What our founders intended was an algorithm to control the representation ratio. How many voters per representative?
Indeed, it does seem that expanding the membership of the U.S. House of Representatives might be the easiest way to heal divisions within the country and force politicians to be more connected with their constituents. Look, we all have our political issues that we care about the most. Some of you care more about abortion, for example. Others may care more about the national debt, or health care, or border security, or getting money out of politics. But the fact of the matter is, you can more easily solve all political issues if you attack the root cause of the problem, which is a lack of representation. The approval rating of Congress has consistently gone down as it has become apparent that members of Congress have become more and more out of touch with ordinary Americans.
The only way to rebuild trust is through representation, good representation. There's an oligarchy running our country in the space of the president. You know, the oligarchy has to decide to give away power back to the people to restore an institution of trust. The place for that to happen, I think very clearly, is the people's house. No taxation without representation was our founding battle cry. And today we have 7 times worse representation than a citizen in the United Kingdom in their lower house, the House of Commons.
I always like to bring up the new silent majority, not the old one that Richard Nixon used to talk about. That new silent majority makes up more or less about 2/3 of Americans. If you don't believe me, to bring up a few examples here, according to various opinion polls, approximately 2/3 of Americans want complete legalization of cannabis. Approximately 2/3 of Americans are cool with a carbon tax to combat climate change. Approximately 2/3 of Americans want some version of universal health care. Approximately 2/3 of Americans want to end gerrymandering. Approximately 2/3 of Americans want limits on campaign spending. And way more than 2/3 of Americans want mandatory background checks for all gun sales and term limits for Congress. But does the United States actually have those things? Absolutely not. And many argue it's because members of Congress have no incentive to pass those things.
Probably the most pushback I get is about, like, where do they all go? How are we going to fit them in DC? What I'll say is, like, there's a lot of land left in DC. There's lots of space all over the place, and we're great at engineering and architecture, and I'm sure we can build something amazing. And until then, when it's called the Federal Triangle, for a reason, all those buildings are right there. So
most people don't even know that members of Congress don't have offices that they just go to in the Capitol every day.
Yeah. Cannon, Rayburn, and Longworth are the 3 House office buildings that all of the House staff sit in across the street of the Capitol. One of the other things I talked with staffers about is if we increase the number of members, there's not enough housing for staffers in DC. Where would they go? And I'm like, well, how about y'all just hang out in your home district?
And this is kind of crazy, but the House of Representatives is likely less representative today than it's ever been in American history. This explains probably why in one poll recently, Congress had an approval rating of just 13%. Oof. So yeah, I think the vast majority of Americans would agree that Congress does not adequately represent them, and perhaps this explains a growing movement to uncap the House. A lot of people that are kind of like you and me that are skeptical of big, inefficient bureaucracies. The common talking point I hear that for those few people who are aware of uncapping the House, they say, well, if you don't like how government's functioning, why on earth would you want to make it bigger?
I think you make it smaller. There are currently 3 million federal executive agency workers, commonly referred to as bureaucrats, who have this dual legislative executive branch function. And you're going to be replacing some of those with these legislators and their staff. It's probably not an exact 1-to-1 ratio on day one, But I think over time, by increasing the size of the legislative branch, you will shrink the size of this quasi-executive legislative branch and return some of those legislative functions to the legislature.
According to my calculations, if we had one representative for every 30,000 constituents like George Washington wanted, that means today we would have approximately 11,400 representatives.
You know, I actually think 11,000 is fine. 11,000 doesn't worry me at all.
Clap and the folks at Uncap the House are currently trying to get Congress to pass a law to expand the size of the House. Last year, Congressman Earl Blumenauer and his bow tie introduced a bill to increase the size of it to 585 following the 2030 census. And maybe, just maybe, if a bunch of Americans watch this video and like this video and share this video with all their friends and family and members of Congress, one day we might have more than 435 members in the House of Representatives. Like 436, for example. Or 11,400. Let's start small, buddy. But what do you think? Should the U.S. House expand its membership? If so, how many members should it have? Let me know down below. And now it's time for my monthly shout out to all my Patreon supporters who donate at least $15 or more each month to my channel. Starting with my biggest donors and going in reverse order alphabetically, thank you to Trevin Jones, Sean Connett, Robert Candle, Richard Taylor, Psycho, Patrick Stewart, Pat Iapicca, Nick Everett, Nicholas Dronsky, Neo R14, Michael Olszewski, Michael Cortez, Joe Cook, Jesus Carrillo, Jeremy Dunham, Isaiah Warfield, Isabel Fletch Fick, Empty Machine, Dr. Paul J. Lilly, Derek Williams, Corey Ryman, Austin Ciros, Anthony Beckett, Andrew B., Alvino V., Alicia Solberg, Zachary F. Parker, Victor McLean, Ty Marwitz, Thomas Oppenheim, Taylor Almond, TC, Steve Bryan, Stacy, Salty, Raquel Jones, Oliver E., Naderade, Michael Shiloh, Michael Burt, Justin Love, Jennifer, Jacob Birnbaum, Jack L., Eric Hernandez, Emily Glover Wilson, Elias Pierce, Derek Ray, Andrew Snyder, Andrew Burns, Aditya Anand, and Adam Christians. Hey, thanks to all my Patreon supporters, and thank you for watching.